Sarah Mitchell stood at the checkout counter of Henderson's General Store, her hands steady as she counted out bills for a bag of groceries. The small Idaho town of Pine Ridge hadn't changed much in the 8 years she'd been away. Same wooden floors that creaked underfoot. Same faded photos of the founding families on the walls. Same curious stares from people who thought they knew her story but didn't know anything at all. "That'll be $42.50, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice tight and cold. Sarah handed over the money, but the older woman didn't move to give her the change. Instead, she called out to the back of the store, "Tom, come on out here." Tom Henderson emerged from the stockroom, wiping his hands on his apron. He was a big man, the kind who'd played football in high school 30 years ago and still wore his varsity jacket to town events. His eyes narrowed when he saw Sarah. "Well, well," he said, crossing his thick arms. "Sarah Mitchell, heard you were back in town." "Just picking up some groceries for my mother," Sarah replied quietly. She knew what was coming. She'd felt it building since she walked through the door. "Your mother's a good woman," Tom said. "Shame what you put her through." A few other customers had stopped their shopping now, watching the scene unfold. Sarah recognized most of them. Betty Walsh from the library, old Mr. Peterson from the hardware store, Jenny Martinez, who'd been 2 grades below her in school. "I didn't put her through anything," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "That's not what we heard," Mrs. Henderson chimed in. She still hadn't given Sarah her change. "We heard you got discharged, dishonorably, for cowardice." The word hung in the air like poison. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came when her past and present collided. She could have corrected them right there, could have told them the truth. But she'd learned long ago that some people didn't want the truth. They wanted their story, the one that made sense to them. "May I have my change, please?" Sarah asked. Tom stepped closer, his bulk intimidating. "We don't want your kind here, you understand. This is a patriotic town. My grandfather fought in World War II. My father did 2 tours in Vietnam. We honor our soldiers here, real soldiers." "Tom, please," Sarah said, her patience wearing thin. "I just want to buy groceries and go home." "You should have thought about that before you ran away from your unit," he said, raising his voice now. "Before you abandoned your fellow soldiers. Men and women died because of cowards like you." Sarah's jaw clenched. She'd faced down armed insurgents in Kandahar. She'd carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire. She'd earned every scar on her body, visible and invisible. But standing in this small-town store, being judged by people who'd never left Idaho, she felt more exposed than she ever had in combat. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said quietly. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," Tom said. He turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "This woman wore our uniform and disgraced it. She's no hero. She's a coward and a disgrace." Betty Walsh nodded in agreement. Mr. Peterson shook his head in disgust. Only Jenny Martinez looked uncertain, like maybe something didn't add up. Sarah looked at Mrs. Henderson one last time. "My change." The older woman counted out $7.50, slapping the bills and coins onto the counter instead of handing them over. Sarah collected her money, picked up her grocery bag, and walked toward the door with her head high. "Don't come back here," Tom called after her. "We don't serve cowards." Sarah pushed through the door and into the bright afternoon sunshine. Her hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from rage, from the unfairness of it all, from the weight of secrets she couldn't share and truths she couldn't speak. She walked to her old pickup truck, set the groceries in the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel. For a long moment she just breathed, in through her nose, out through her mouth, the breathing exercises they'd taught her at Walter Reed. She started the engine and drove toward her mother's house on Maple Street, past the town square with its memorial to fallen soldiers, past the high school where she'd once dreamed of her future, past all the familiar landmarks of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. What Tom Henderson didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 3 days everything would change. Sarah's mother, Grace Mitchell, sat in her wheelchair by the living room window, looking out at the oak tree she and Sarah's father had planted 40 years ago. She turned when Sarah came through the door, her face lighting up despite the pain that was always there now. "How was town?" Grace asked, though the worry in her eyes said she already knew. "Same as always," Sarah said, setting the groceries on the kitchen counter. She began unpacking them, putting away bread and milk, canned soup and fresh vegetables. "They gave you trouble." Sarah paused, her hand on a box of tea. "Tom Henderson called me a coward in front of half the town." Grace's face hardened. "That man's always been a fool, and his wife's no better." "They believe what they heard, Mom. Can't really blame them." "Yes, I can," Grace said fiercely. "You're my daughter, I know who you are." Sarah came over and knelt beside her mother's wheelchair. At 68, Grace Mitchell had been battling cancer for 3 years. The treatments had stolen her hair and her strength, but never her spirit. She was the reason Sarah had come home, taking a leave from her current assignment to care for the woman who'd raised her alone after Sarah's father died in a construction accident. "Tell me again," Grace said softly. "Tell me what really happened." Sarah had told the story only once before, and that was to her mother. Even now, most of it was classified, but Grace deserved to know. "We were on a mission in Afghanistan," Sarah began. "December, 6 years ago. My unit was tasked with extracting a high-value target from a compound outside Kandahar. Intelligence said he had information about an imminent attack on U.S. forces." Grace took her daughter's hand, holding tight. "We went in at night, 10 of us, but the intelligence was wrong or someone tipped them off. It was a trap. We were ambushed the moment we entered the compound. Sergeant Davies went down first, then Lopez and Chen. The rest of us were pinned down in a storage room, taking fire from 3 sides." Sarah's voice remained steady, but her eyes were far away, seeing things her mother would never see. "Our commanding officer, Lieutenant Morrison, panicked. He wanted to surrender, but I'd seen what happened to American soldiers who surrendered to that particular cell. We had maybe 2 minutes before they breached our position, so I made a choice." "You took command," Grace said. "I disobeyed a direct order," Sarah corrected. "Morrison ordered us to lay down weapons. I refused. I grabbed the radio and called in air support, giving our exact coordinates. Then I led 4 soldiers out through a back window while Morrison and 2 others stayed behind, thinking I was abandoning them." Grace squeezed her daughter's hand tighter. "We fought our way to an extraction point half a mile away, took heavy fire. I took a round in the shoulder, another in the leg, but we made it. Helicopter picked us up and hit the compound with missiles 30 seconds later, eliminating the enemy force." "But Morrison survived," Grace said. "Morrison and his 2 soldiers were found in that storage room, cowering but alive. When we got back to base, he filed a report saying I'd abandoned my post and endangered the mission. Said I'd disobeyed orders out of cowardice, not courage. Said the only reason any of us survived was luck." "But that's not true." "No," Sarah said. "The 4 soldiers who came with me told a different story. They said I saved their lives, but Morrison was the ranking officer. His word carried weight. The investigation went on for months. They couldn't prove cowardice, but they couldn't prove heroism either. Too much chaos, too many conflicting accounts. In the end, they gave me a general discharge and sent me home." "Not dishonorable," Grace pointed out. "No, but people hear what they want to hear. General discharge became dishonorable discharge. Disobeyed orders became abandoned post. And somehow I became the coward who ran while others fought." Grace's eyes blazed. "Someone needs to tell the truth." "The truth is classified, Mom. The mission, the target, all of it. I signed papers. I can't talk about the details publicly." "So you just let them call you a coward. Let Tom Henderson humiliate you in your own hometown." Sarah smiled sadly. "What choice do I have?" Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you still have it, the tattoo?" That- Sarah nodded. After the mission, after the investigation, after everything fell apart, she'd gotten a tattoo on her spine, between her shoulder blades where no one could see it unless she wanted them to. It was a list of names: Davies, Lopez, Chen, the three who died in that compound, and below them four more names: Kowalski, Barnes, Reed, Williams, the four she'd led to safety. "I'll never forget them," Sarah said. What neither of them knew was that Captain James Morrison, now a major, had been reassigned. His new post: commander of the reserve base just 40 miles outside Pine Ridge. And in 3 days, he'd be coming to town. The announcement appeared in the Pine Ridge Gazette on Tuesday morning. Major James Morrison, decorated officer and local hero, would be attending the town's annual Veterans Day ceremony on Thursday. He'd be giving a speech honoring fallen soldiers and would present medals to 3 local veterans for their service. Sarah saw the announcement while sitting in the waiting room at her mother's oncology appointment. She stared at Morrison's photo in the paper, older now, more lines around his eyes, his hair graying at the temples, but unmistakably him. "That's him, isn't it?" Grace said, looking over from her wheelchair. "The one who lied about you." Sarah folded the newspaper carefully. "Yes." "Are you going to the ceremony?" "I don't think that's a good idea, Mom." But Grace Mitchell had other plans. That evening, after Sarah had helped her with dinner and medication, Grace made a phone call, then another, and another. By Wednesday morning, word had spread through her network of friends: the book club ladies, the church volunteers, the cancer support group. "Mom, what did you do?" Sarah asked, seeing the determined look on her mother's face. "I made sure people know you're coming to the ceremony," Grace said simply. "And I made sure the mayor knows there's something wrong with the story Tom Henderson's been spreading." "Mom." "No, Sarah. I've watched you carry this for too long. I've watched this town treat you like dirt when you deserve honor. I don't care what's classified and what's not. It's time people saw who you really are." Thursday dawned cold and clear. The ceremony was set for 11 o'clock in the town square, where a platform had been erected and rows of folding chairs set up. American flags snapped in the November wind. Sarah dressed carefully in civilian clothes, jeans, a simple blouse, her father's old jacket. She wheeled her mother to the square at 10:30, finding seats near the back. Already people were staring, whispering. Tom Henderson stood with a group of men near the refreshment table, his voice carrying across the square. "Can't believe she has the nerve to show her face here, on Veterans Day of all days." Sarah kept her eyes forward, her hand on her mother's shoulder. The square filled up quickly. The high school band played patriotic songs. Veterans in their old uniforms gathered near the platform, comparing medals and telling stories. At 5 minutes to 11, a black SUV pulled up, and Major James Morrison stepped out. He wore his dress uniform, his chest covered in ribbons and medals. He smiled and shook hands, working the crowd like a politician. Sarah watched him, her heart beating faster. He hadn't seen her yet. The ceremony began. The mayor gave a speech. The high school choir sang the Star-Spangled Banner. Then Morrison took the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong and confident, "it is an honor to stand before you today in this beautiful town among true patriots." He spoke about duty, about honor, about the sacrifices made by men and women in uniform. He spoke about his own service, about the difficult decisions commanders must make, about the importance of following orders and maintaining discipline. "In combat," he said, "there is no room for those who put themselves above the mission, no room for those who act out of self-interest rather than the good of the unit. The soldiers who serve with honor are the ones who understand that we are only as strong as our commitment to each other." Sarah felt Grace's hand find hers. Morrison continued, his voice growing more passionate. I've seen cowardice in my career. I've seen soldiers who break under pressure, who abandon their posts, who endanger their fellow warriors. And I've seen true heroes, men and women who stand firm, who follow orders even when afraid, who put duty above all else. He paused for effect, looking out over the crowd, and that's when his eyes found Sarah. For just a moment his composure slipped. His face went pale. He knew her instantly, even after 6 years, even in civilian clothes. Sarah held his gaze, unflinching. Morrison recovered quickly, clearing his throat and continuing his speech. But Sarah could see his hands gripping the podium tighter, could see the tension in his shoulders. The speech ended to applause. Morrison presented medals to 3 local veterans, shaking their hands and posing for photos. Then the mayor invited everyone to the reception in the community center. Sarah wheeled her mother toward the refreshments, intending to get Grace something to drink before leaving. But Tom Henderson blocked their path. "I'm surprised you stayed for the whole speech," he said loudly, drawing attention. "Thought you might run away again." Several people nearby turned to watch. "Tom, leave her alone," Jenny Martinez said quietly. She'd been standing nearby with her husband. "No, I won't leave her alone," Tom said. "This woman disgraced the uniform, and now she comes here on Veterans Day showing her face among real heroes. It's an insult." Morrison had been across the room, but he was walking toward them now, his face unreadable. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. Tom turned to him eagerly. "Major Morrison, sir, this is Sarah Mitchell. She was discharged from the army for cowardice, abandoned her post in Afghanistan. I was just telling her she doesn't belong at a ceremony honoring real soldiers." Morrison looked at Sarah. Their eyes met. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Grace Mitchell's voice cut through the silence. "Tell them, Major. Tell them the truth about what happened in Kandahar." The community center fell silent. Everyone was watching now. The veterans, the families, the mayor, the newspaper reporter with her camera. Morrison's face had gone from pale to red. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Grace Mitchell might have been in a wheelchair, might have been weakened by cancer, but her voice carried the strength of a mother defending her child. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Major. You were there. You were my daughter's commanding officer. Tell these people what really happened that night in December, 6 years ago." "Mrs. Mitchell, this isn't the appropriate venue." "Then where is the appropriate venue?" Grace demanded. "Where can the truth be told? My daughter has been living under a cloud for 6 years because of your lies. She can't defend herself because the mission is classified. But you've been dining out on your version of events, haven't you? Giving speeches about honor and duty while you know what you really did." Tom Henderson looked confused. "What's she talking about, Major?" Morrison's jaw clenched. This woman's daughter disobeyed direct orders in a combat situation. She endangered the entire unit. "She saved 4 lives," Grace interrupted, "including her own, while you cowered in a storage room." A murmur went through the crowd. The mayor stepped forward. "Perhaps we should take this somewhere private." "No," Sarah said, speaking for the first time. She stood up from her chair, facing Morrison directly. "No more private conversations. No more classified reports that twist the truth. If Major Morrison wants to call me a coward in front of this town, then let's have it out here, in front of everyone." Morrison's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route, but the crowd had formed a circle around them. There was nowhere to go. "Sarah," he said quietly, "don't do this. You signed papers. There are consequences for violating security protocols." "Then I'll face those consequences," Sarah said, "because I'm tired of letting you control the narrative. I'm tired of people like Tom Henderson thinking I ran from a fight when the truth is I ran toward one." She turned to address the crowd. "6 years ago, my unit walked into an ambush in Afghanistan. 3 soldiers were killed in the first 30 seconds. The rest of us were trapped, taking fire from 3 sides. Major Morrison, Then Lieutenant Morrison ordered us to surrender. He believed it was the only way to save lives. Morrison started to speak, but Sarah raised her hand. I'm not saying his decision was wrong, she continued. Fear makes us all react differently, but I had intelligence he didn't have. I knew what that particular insurgent cell did to captured American soldiers. I'd seen the videos. I knew that surrender meant torture and execution, probably filmed and posted online. The crowd was riveted now. Even Tom Henderson had stopped sneering. So I made a choice, Sarah said. I disobeyed my commanding officer's direct order. I called in air support and I led 4 soldiers out through a back window. We fought our way to an extraction point half a mile away. I took 2 bullets in the process, but all 4 of those soldiers made it home to their families. That's not how it happened, Morrison said, but his voice was weak. Then tell them how it happened, sir, Sarah challenged. Tell them why you filed a report saying I abandoned my post. Tell them why you recommended I be court-martialed for cowardice when the 4 soldiers I saved filed reports saying I was a hero. Morrison's face was twisted with anger and shame. You had no right to countermand my orders. I was the commanding officer. You were paralyzed with fear, Sarah said, not unkindly. It happens. Combat is terrifying. But instead of admitting that, instead of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, my decision saved lives, you tried to destroy my career. You wrote reports painting me as reckless and insubordinate. You told anyone who would listen that I was a coward who ran. I did what I had to do to maintain order and discipline. You did what you had to do to save your career, Sarah said quietly. And I understand that too, but it ends now. She turned back to the crowd. I was given a general discharge, not dishonorable, despite what some of you have heard. The army couldn't prove cowardice because there was none to prove, but they couldn't declare me a hero either because I disobeyed orders. So I fell into this gray area, and Major Morrison's version became the accepted truth. Tom Henderson had tears in his eyes now. Sarah, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, Sarah said. How could you? I couldn't tell you. The mission details are still classified, but I'm tired of silence being mistaken for guilt. The mayor cleared his throat. Major Morrison, is what she's saying true? Did you file a false report? Morrison's shoulders sagged. For a moment he looked like he might continue to deny it. Then something broke in him. I panicked, he said quietly. We were taking heavy fire. I thought surrender was the only option. When Sarah defied my order and led half the unit out, I was so afraid she'd get them all killed. So afraid I'd made the wrong call. And when they actually made it, when the helicopter extracted them and destroyed the compound, I couldn't admit that her judgment had been better than mine. I couldn't admit that a private first class had seen the situation more clearly than her commanding officer. The admission hung in the air. So you lied, Grace said. You ruined my daughter's reputation to protect your own. Morrison nodded slowly. I told myself I was protecting discipline, protecting the chain of command, but yes, I lied. A camera flashed. The reporter was taking notes frantically. I think, the mayor said carefully, that we need to have some official conversations, Major Morrison, conversations with military authorities. But Sarah held up her hand again. Wait. Everyone looked at her. I don't want Major Morrison court-martialed, she said. I don't want revenge. I just want the truth known. I want him to stop telling his version of that night. I want the record corrected. Morrison looked at her with something like wonder. After everything I did to you, why? Because I understand what fear can do to people, Sarah said. And because destroying you won't undo the last 6 years. It won't bring back the 3 soldiers who died that night. It won't change anything except creating more pain. She stepped closer to him, her voice soft enough that only those nearby could hear. But if you ever lie about that mission again, if you ever call me a coward again, I will go to the Pentagon with everything I have. Do you understand? Morrison nodded, his eyes on the floor. Sarah turned to leave, wheeling her mother toward the door. The crowd parted silently to let them through. But they'd only made it a few steps when Morrison called out, "Sarah, wait." She turned. He was removing his jacket, his dress uniform coat with all its medals. The room gasped as he lifted his shirt, revealing his back. There, tattooed on his spine, was a single word: coward. "I had this done a year after the incident," he said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't live with what I'd done, but I couldn't admit it either, so I marked myself with the truth, where only I would know it was there." The room was utterly silent. "I'm sorry," Morrison said. "I'm so sorry." The story hit the national news within 24 hours. "Soldier vindicated after 6 years of false accusations," read the headline in USA Today. The local reporter's account had been picked up by the wire services, and suddenly Sarah Mitchell's name was everywhere. But Sarah barely paid attention. She was too busy taking care of her mother, whose cancer treatments couldn't wait for media circuses. The real changes happened quietly, in the days and weeks that followed. Tom Henderson showed up at Grace Mitchell's house 3 days after the ceremony. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I'm sorry," he said when Sarah answered the door. "I'm so sorry. I called you terrible things. I treated you like dirt. And you're a hero. You're a genuine hero, and I was too blind and stupid to see it." Sarah invited him in. They talked for over an hour. She learned that Tom's son had been dishonorably discharged for drug use while deployed, that the shame of it had eaten at Tom for years, that he'd been projecting his own family's pain onto her. "It doesn't excuse what I did," Tom said, "but I want you to know, I see you now, I really see you." Betty Walsh came by with flowers. Mr. Peterson delivered groceries, refusing to let Sarah pay. Jenny Martinez organized a meal train, ensuring that Grace and Sarah had home-cooked dinners every night for a month. The mayor convened a special town meeting and issued a formal apology on behalf of Pine Ridge. The local VFW Post invited Sarah to join, making her an honorary member and giving her a plaque that read, "To Sarah Mitchell, who exemplifies courage under fire and grace under pressure." But the moment that meant the most came 2 weeks after the ceremony. Sarah was at the grocery store, Henderson's General Store, the same place where she'd been humiliated, when a young woman in army fatigues approached her. She was maybe 25, with sharp eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "Specialist Williams," Sarah said, recognizing her immediately despite the years. "Captain Williams now," the young woman said with a smile. "I got promoted last year." Williams had been one of the 4 soldiers Sarah had led out of that compound in Kandahar. Sarah had lost track of her after the discharge, had wondered sometimes what became of the soldiers whose lives she'd saved. "I saw the news," Williams said, "about Morrison finally telling the truth. I wanted you to know. We tried. All 4 of us who were there, we filed reports. We testified. We told anyone who would listen that you saved our lives. But Morrison outranked us, and the Army was more interested in protecting the chain of command than finding the truth." "I know," Sarah said. "It's okay." "It's not okay," Williams said fiercely. "You should have gotten the Medal of Honor. Instead, you got a general discharge and 6 years of people calling you a coward. That's not okay. That will never be okay." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "This belonged to my grandmother," Williams said. "She was a nurse in World War II. It's not much, but I want you to have it." Inside the box was a simple silver medal on a blue ribbon. Engraved on the back were the words, "For exceptional courage." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I can't accept this." "You already have," Williams said. "You gave me my life back that night. You gave me the chance to become a captain, to serve my country, to get married and have kids someday. This medal belonged to a hero, and now it belongs to a hero. That's how it should be." They embraced there in the middle of the grocery aisle, two soldiers who'd survived hell together, finally getting the chance to honor each other properly. That night, Sarah showed her mother the medal. Grace held it carefully, running her fingers over the engraving. "I'm proud of you," Grace said. "Not for this. Not for what happened in Afghanistan. I'm proud of how you carried yourself these past 6 years. How you held your head high even when everyone in town believed the worst about you. That's the real courage, Sarah. Anyone can be brave for a moment in combat. But to be brave every day, year after year, when the whole world thinks you're a coward, that's the kind of courage most people never find." Sarah knelt beside her mother's wheelchair, resting her head on Grace's lap like she used to do as a child. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." "Yes, you could have," Grace said, stroking her daughter's hair. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." 3 months later, Sarah received an official letter from the Department of the Army. After a review of the incident in Kandahar, taking into account newly available testimony and evidence, her discharge status was being upgraded to honorable. Moreover, she was being awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. The ceremony took place at the reserve base 40 miles from Pine Ridge. Sarah wore her dress uniform for the first time in 6 years. The 4 soldiers she'd saved that night all attended: Williams, Kowalski, Barnes, and Reed. They stood at attention as a 2-star general pinned the medal to Sarah's chest. "This honor is long overdue," the general said. "Specialist Sarah Mitchell, now Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, acted with extraordinary heroism and selflessness. She made a decision in the heat of combat that saved 4 American lives. The Army failed her by not recognizing this sooner. We do so today." After the ceremony, as people congratulated Sarah and posed for photos, she noticed Morrison standing at the back of the crowd. He was in civilian clothes now, having retired from active duty after the truth came out. She walked over to him. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I almost didn't," Morrison admitted. "But I needed to see this, needed to see you get the recognition you deserve." He paused. "I've enrolled in therapy, working through a lot of things, trying to become someone I can respect." "That's good," Sarah said. "I'll carry the shame of what I did for the rest of my life," he said. "But maybe I can use it. Maybe I can help other officers understand the importance of admitting when they're wrong, of telling the truth even when it's hard." Sarah nodded. "That would be good, that would mean something." They shook hands, 2 people forever bound by a night in Kandahar, finally finding a way toward peace. Sarah returned to Pine Ridge that evening. Her mother was in hospice now, the cancer finally winning its long battle. But Grace was still alert, still present, still fierce. "Show me," Grace said. Sarah pinned the silver star to her mother's hospital gown, just over her heart. "This is yours too, Mom. You never gave up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself." Grace smiled, touching the medal with trembling fingers. "My daughter, the hero I always knew." "I'm not a hero," Sarah said. "I just did what needed to be done." "That's what heroes always say," Grace replied. She died 3 days later, peacefully in her sleep, the silver star still pinned over her heart. At the funeral, the church was packed. The 4 soldiers Sarah had saved came and stood honor guard at the casket. Tom Henderson and his wife sat in the front row, weeping. The mayor gave a eulogy. The VFW Post presented the flag. And when Sarah stood to speak, she talked about her mother's courage, her mother's strength, her mother's unwavering belief in the truth. She talked about the real heroism of ordinary people living ordinary lives with extraordinary grace. After the service, as the sun set over Pine Ridge, Sarah stood at her mother's graveside. She rolled up her sleeve and looked at the tattoo on her spine, the names of the 3 soldiers who died and the 4 she'd saved. She'd survived Kandahar. She'd survived the lies. She'd survived the shame and the isolation and the long years of being misunderstood. But most importantly, she'd survived with her integrity intact, with her courage undiminished, with her soul unmarked by bitterness or hatred. As she walked back to her truck, Specialist Williams, Captain Williams, fell into step beside her. "What will you do now?" Williams asked. Sarah looked up at the Montana sky, vast and clear and full of stars. "I think," she said slowly, "I'll stay in town. Open that cafe my mother always talked about. Maybe teach some self-defense classes to the high school girls. Live a quiet life. Be part of this community that finally knows who I really am." "Sounds perfect," Williams said. And it was, because Sarah Mitchell had learned something in that compound in Kandahar, something the years of lies and shame had only reinforced, that the only person's opinion of you that truly matters is your own. That courage isn't about what other people see, but about what you know to be true in your heart. She'd been called a coward by people who didn't know her, and a hero by people who did. But the truth was, she was neither. She was simply a soldier who'd done her duty, a daughter who'd loved her mother, a woman who'd refused to let other people's lies define her reality.